All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Matthew Antoniac. I previously have 10 years experience in industrial printing on 16 color presses. And then I went to digital printing with Konic Minolta. I've been with them for the last 8 years. Last 14 months I spent in Ramsey at SSD, and this is why this is happening. So to start out, does everybody have any idea of what we have here on the screen? Are you guys familiar with how to tell the difference between a 96 layer storage board and a 112 layer storage board?
My question would be, why is it important?
Okay.
I mean, a storage board, that it holds data.
Mm-hmm.
So what makes it important?
So the previous board is they started out with a 64 layer, right? And then it went up to a 96 layer, and it's now 112 layer, which is basically they're adding more storage to it. So
You have to replace one, you have to get the right one.
correct.
Okay.
And in order to do that, you have to be able to identify which board you have. So this document will help you for reference to determine which board you have installed in your machine. Were you going to say something?
No.
Okay.
I was going to say just slide the screen up, but you're good.
Okay.
What are they sending them out with right now?
What's that?
What are the machines coming out with?
So the newer models coming out should come with the 112 layer boards, but I think a lot of this stems to when COVID was around and the pandemic, and these machines finally are being used, and now we're seeing the problems. Moving forward, it's been taken care of, and most of your machines should come with the proper storage.
So you're saying that the newer boards, looking at the picture, it's got one notch, older boards that have 2 notches, so it's probably a different PCI bus.
So yeah, so
So I can't put a new board in an old machine? Right? Is that
yes, you can. You can put a new board in an old machine. Yes.
Right.
Yep. So originally, this is what the original boards were small. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it at all. We can pop the back cover off from this so you guys can get a visual if we need to. The old boards were a small square. Then they came out with the new one, which was longer. So you've probably seen some are short, some are long. Now they've went back to the short board, but they've incorporated the memory into that short board. So whether you have a long one, it was very simple to tell prior to the release of the new board, because you could look at it and say, well, it's long, I have the new one. But now they've released the short one. So now you really need to know how to distinguish which board you have, because now you're going to have 2 small boards. One of them is going to be the 112 layer, the other is going to be the 96. And you need to be able to know how to identify that. And that's what this document is.
The moral to the story is you need to know what you have to know where to go. And if you don't know what you have and you can't tell the advisor, he's going to tell you something that might not pertain to the machine and the configuration that you have. That makes sense? So if you have a 96 layer board and you don't tell them that you have a 96 or a 112, they're going to go down the route thinking you have the 112, and that might take you in a place that Rick's.
So that's the purpose of knowing it, not necessarily for replacing it, but
Both.
Both, yeah. So the point of identifying and knowing what you have in the machine is going to be directly related to a few things. 25% boot, where it just sits there. Machine is up, sitting there, shuts off, reboots on its own, or you'll be doing stuff on the panel and it'll freeze. It's basically your 3 symptoms. That's kind of what's been going on. So, and it's usually 8 out of 10 times directly related to the storage board. Now, and the reason that this is important, so if you get a service call on one of these I-Series machines and you're getting a 25% boot, it's rebooting, or it's freezing, you need to pop the back cover off and be able to identify what board is installed in that machine before you do anything else. Okay, because if you don't know what's in the machine, you could spiral yourself somewhere that you're not going to be able to get out of. SSD has been, when you call for these issues, they've pretty much just, like replaced the storage board. So even if you have a 112 layer storage board, you're replacing it again with another one and it doesn't resolve the issue. Then they tell you replace the CPU board. And then they tell you replace the baseboard. And before you know it, we don't have any of those boards and we don't know what's been done. So a really important part about this is you need to be detailed in what you do and when you do it and the result of what happened after you did it. So that when it gets to myself or somebody else, we potentially can fix the machine without having to order more stuff, right? Because if we know what you did, when you did it, and what happened after you did it, we can reverse that and fix it, assuming you guys save the old boards. A lot of the times people aren't saving the boards, so that turns into another problem. So two really important things that I can tell you is one, save the boards that you take out of the machine until we're 100% sure that the machine is running. And two, make sure you take detailed notes of what you've done from start to wherever you end up.
So is this part of a bulletin?
This is part of a bulletin, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Is this a part of the best practice guide?
This is not in the best practice guide.
Okay. I know there's a lot of photos like this.
Yep.
So real fast, what Matt's asking as far as the boards, I don't know what your programs are here about warranty. You know, you want to try to get the boards back in time and get the warranty claim and get that. But if you're troubleshooting a problem, we would ask, until we know the problem is fixed, that you hold on to those boards. If they go beyond the warranty period, no problem. Submit the warranty claim, let us know, let Matt and me know, and then I'll make sure that you get the warranty. Because we're the ones asking you to hold it over time to make sure. So if we have to come out because it's still not resolved, we need the original boards to potentially be able to recall the machine. Okay.
Otherwise, we have to come and replace everything and then reconfigure the entire machine.
Is there a certain way to submit that warranty claim? or just-
Online, the normal warranty claim online, and then if they deny it, just take that email and send it to us,
Okay.
and I'll get it correct.
So does anybody have any questions about how to identify the 3 different storage boards? There's 3. 2 that can be used is the long one and the short 112 layer. So this is going to be really important to be able to tell the difference between those 2 short boards.
So if we order one, we're getting one for us.
Depending on what part number you order.
Okay, so there's different ones.
There is. So in the parts manual, it was updated. The long 112 layer storage board ends in M00. The newest one, I believe, ends in Q00, which is the short 112.
So we need to order what we have in it?
No. So, nope. So you need to, once you identify what you have in the machine, that's going to determine what we're going to do next, right? So does anybody know what the GXX diagnosis and recovery tool is?
Yeah.
You do. Anybody else? Okay.
It's just a boot firmware, right?
No. No. So the GXX tool is located at MyCam One Stop Product Support. Type in your machine, click on firmware, special firmware, 4th or 5th one down. It'll say GXX dash. I'm going too fast, right? Right, is everybody? So you know how to get firmware, right? So it's in the firmware, special firmware, 4th or 5th one down. It'll say GXX dash 34 or 35, whatever model machine you have has a GXX for it. So you can't use a GXX for a 550 on a 360, you know what I mean? So for whatever model machine that you have, you need to go to One Stop, special firmware, GXX tool. So far, we've gotten to a machine that has 25% boot, rebooting, or panel freezing, right? And we've popped the back cover off, identified which storage board is attached to the CPU board, okay? Once we have that information gathered, get the GXX tool. You put it in, do the same thing you would as firmware. It'll boot up into, it's like an advanced self-diagnostics menu. And it looks deeper into the machine, and it also will tell you, there's a PDF that comes along with it, so it'll tell you how to use the tool, but it'll identify things in the machine, and it'll say SSD is read or write only. So that means it's identified that you have a bad storage board and it needs to be replaced. or it'll tell you CPU board is bad. If that's the case, order and replace the CPU board. Do not rely on the GXX tool. 75% of the time it doesn't work. It'll say everything's all okay, which we know it's not okay. Machine's having issues. So
That actually, they formatted or partitioned it.
correct. Yep. So in order to do a partition, you'll have to call SSD, so from the start of this to the end of this is basically a procedure, and it needs to be followed from step 1 through step 10 exactly as it is. If you don't do that, you're not going to fix it, or we're going to have to come out. So we've identified that. We've ran the GXX tool. Now this is where 25% of the time it does work, right? So when it does, follow what it says. Replace your CPU or replace your storage board or whatever it tells you is wrong. In the other cases where it says everything is okay, we know it's not okay. That's where we go on to here and determine which board's on the machine, right? So if you have a 96 layer storage board on the machine and it's presenting these issues, more than likely that's got to go. The 96 layer storage board has been discontinued, end of life, Konic Minolta. So it's not supported. The I-Series machines, I've seen them come in brand new out of the box, not turn on. I've seen them go into the field for 6 months, and then you start having all these problems. The longest one I think I've ever seen is probably 12 to 18 months with the old board before it fails. Now, so you might think like, okay, well, these machines come in, should I pop the back cover off, see what it has and replace it? So the answer is no, because they will run for 6, 12, 18 months, who knows? Konica doesn't want you to do that because we'll end up with an influx of storage board orders. They'll get on back order, then you won't even be able to get them. So don't mess with it when you receive the machine. This is only going to pertain to when you get a service call for one of those issues. You'll pop it off. So now we're going to check it. If you have the 96 board, you need to order the 112 layer and install that. More than likely, that's going to resolve your issue. Now, the thing about it, they've changed a whole bunch of stuff. Has anybody replaced the storage board before?
Oh, yeah.
So, okay. Does everybody know what boot ROM is? Yeah? Everybody over here? Okay. So that's good. So you need to know the procedure when you replace a storage board, because if you don't do it the way that it's supposed to be, it's not going to work. It's going to be stuck at 25%. You're going to call SSD. You're going to say, I replaced the storage board and I still have the same problem. They're going to tell you to replace the CPU board. So a lot of the times where I see this is people don't identify what board's in the machine. They already have the 112 layer board. They order another one and it doesn't do anything. So if you identified before that it has a 96 layer and not a 112 layer, when you replace it and upgrade it to the 112 layer, it more than likely will resolve your issue. So the common misconception is SSD will tell you to replace it without verifying which one's actually installed in the machine first. That leads us into a spiraling downhill, out of control tunnel. Because if it's not bad and we replace it and then we start moving on to the CPU board and the storage board have to marry, and they're different. It's just like on the 8 series when you had the hard drive and the MFP board. It's the same theory, same concept. So then you run into issues getting those two to communicate and work. So now you've introduced another problem and we still haven't resolved your original problem. So now we have 2 problems. Then you can see how this spirals out of control. So run your GXX tool, verify what you have on the machine. So the goal of this really is to save you guys from having to call SSD and prolong this out for 2 weeks and make 6 phone calls. So the first call, they're going to say, run the GXX tool, follow what it says, call me back. So you've already done that now. Then next, they're going to say, replace the storage board. And you're going to say, 1, it had a 96 layer, I upgraded it to 112 layer, problem solved, close the ticket. Or you're going to say, I replaced the storage board and I still have the same problem. And they're going to just, keep throwing boards at you guys. The reason that we know a lot of this is happening is the refurbished boards that get sent to high tech their high tech's telling us there's nothing wrong with them. So a lot of boards are being ordered and replaced that don't need to be. So hopefully this will help solve the problem, right? So the biggest part about this is if it has the 112 layer, more than likely you have a bad CPU. And I'm not saying 100% all the time, but 90%. There is that 10% where the machines do what they want. So that's really important. Is everybody clear on, and you're gonna get a copy of all this so you have it for your reference. So we have an issue with the machine. First thing we do, we walk up to it, we identify what board's in the machine, we run the GXX tool and see what the results are, right? Is everybody good with that? Yes? Sounds good. So diagnosis and recovery tool, we just went over. This is the PDF that comes with it. Again, this stuff is available at One Stop Product Support under special firmware. And this is what the screen looks like and what it's going to do. And then it'll tell you,
Can I ask you about the recovery piece of that?
Yes.
So what's A and B? I mean, what's the difference? One retains data and the other one wipes it?
When you're talking about when it says SSD is read or write only.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a specific definition for what that's explaining between A and B. I think that's just the code that comes up with it. From what I know, there is no difference between A and B. It's just, that's the code.
Yeah, that's why I was confused. They both sound like they do the same thing, but.
Yep. The code just comes up as that way. And it says SSD is read or write only A and B, right?
Yeah.
But it's a storage board, not an SSD board.
Right.
So, I mean, the whole thing is kind of, it's confusing. And a lot of this stuff is confusing. That's why we're going over it, because
I'm like, what the hell is this thing saying?
exactly. So that's why we need to have a conversation about it so that we can clear the air on these issues. There's a lot of things that have changed and a lot of information has come out that wasn't provided. Well, I guess I can't say it wasn't provided because you guys get like the emails with the bulletins like, oh, new bulletin. And most of the time we just, So this stuff all came out and it's scattered everywhere on the website. So the idea is to put it all together and go over it so that you guys have a better understanding of how it's supposed to work. So that's that. This is a document that was made by ESS. This is the KBA article right here. So you can get this online as well. Most important part about this is this piece right here. And what this explains is the boot sequence of the machine. So in order to troubleshoot the machine and figure out what you need to do, you need to understand what it means. And now that, when you get 1 fin, 2 fins, 3 fins, we don't have the fins anymore. Now you have a progress bar. So you need to know at each point what the machine is doing. That way you can know what you need to do to fix it. So this whole chart right here is a flow chart of the boot process of the machine. Okay? So your most common problem is going to be the 25%, right? And sometimes the 50%. So these, right, describes what this is doing. If you get these issues, it is important to check the storage board and verify what you have, because if you have a 112 layer storage board on the machine, you're gonna have a bad CPU board. If you have a 96 layer storage board on the machine, you have a bad storage board. This will determine that. 75% is 1-2, so the bar will get 3/4 of the way, and then that's it. So that we've seen a few times, and it's usually directly related to the baseboard. So if you see it get to 75%, it's a very it's not likely that you won't fix it by replacing the baseboard. That's been the common resolution for 75% boot. So don't even mess with, because you call SSD, you're going to replace the storage board and the CPU board before you get to the baseboard, when all you needed to do was replace the baseboard. And if you have the old board still, when we come out, we can put the originals back in with the new base and get the machine up and running. So that's why it's important to keep your stuff. So this flow chart is here. You guys will have it. The other part of it, so it gives you a flow here of how the self-diagnostic mode works. Just goes through the stuff. You guys will have it. Just read it. Tells you, what to check. Make sure that you're getting power, proper power out of the outlets. I would hope everybody has a multimeter and knows how to use it. But you should be testing. I know, that's why I said I hope. But you should be before you do anything, right? And you get there, check your surge protector.
Yeah, that's what's been called.
Because those have been going all the time. Okay? Number one, before you dive deep into this, check your surge protector, stick your meter in the wall and verify voltage. Make sure it's consistent and steady. If it's not, no matter what you do to this, you're never going to fix it. So that's really important.
Do you think these things are really, like, the power issue on these things, like, are so, like, you put an 8 series on one of those surge protectors, run all day.
Mm-hmm.
You put one of these on there, it won't run at all.
Yep.
And, I mean, reboot.
Yep.
And I think it's taken out. I mean, I've had a few of them on surge protectors that you can get reboot
Mm-hmm.
because of the issue. You go in and look at the power failures in it, and it's like non-stop. So, I mean, it seems like those are so, like, susceptible to the power. Our power around here is like crap anyway.
So another part of that, which I was just going to go into, talking about power, I've seen a lot of these machines where you'll come up, turn it on, and it does nothing.
Yeah.
Like it's dead. First instinct, people, is to go for your power supply. Replace power supply, still dead. We went through and replaced a bunch of stuff in the machine and ended up finding out it's directly related to the CPU board. So the machine could be getting the right power, but it's losing it at the CPU, which is causing it to fail and reboot. The other thing is unplug it from the network. There could be something corrupt on the network that's causing the machine to reboot. So yeah, that's all important. So the rebooting thing, like I said, if it's CPU board, it's typically what it is. And CPU board is also directly related with the power issues. So it kind of goes hand in hand with that one CPU. So just keep that in mind. If you do get one that's dead, before you order a power supply and replace it, check voltages with your multimeter that we all have and use, right? All right, because
notice the older guys, we have no issue with the multimeter.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really important. It's a super important tool to have. You should have it. You should use it. You should know how to use it to test continuity and voltages and all that, because what's happening, people are just ordering boards and putting them in them without troubleshooting.
Well, won't you tell them to make the pins big enough that you can put the meter in?
I will note that down and I will send an email to the proper team.
So is that like you need to have larger font when you get older? Yeah, we
No, they tell you to check them.
I know.
Voltage, and you gotta get a staple.
Well, I know if you troubleshoot your power supply, you've got your AC coming in, but you don't have your DC voltages coming out.
Right.
Or not that you can read them, so you assume it's a power supply. Not necessarily. I guess CPU has to tell it to actually output the voltage.
To the base, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But if you have a motor that has a winding that's shorted, it's going to take out 24 volts at the power supply.
Correct.
And it'll keep it from producing. If you unplug that connector, that all of a sudden
That's
that
why you
voltage will
carry
be
a
there.
piece of tin for it.
Right.
So you should have two 12 volts and one 24 volt coming out of the power supply all the time. If you don't, something's wrong. 12, 12, and 24. So that is the guide on troubleshooting. It also has the storage board identification in it, which was the first document that I showed you. So these bulletins just came out. These are for the memory board for the end of production. I was telling you that they're done doing the production with the smaller style board. So there's 4 different bulletins here, and it's just what's that? So this basically, these bulletins are for different models. So this bulletin's for the 850i and the 950i. Basically, this is pretty much a visual of everything that I just said. So that's for the 850 and 950. Then you have this one, which is for the 650, 750 series. And it tells you again, same things that I just went over with you. This one, same thing, different model. So these bulletins are for the models that are affected by the storage board issue. And there's 4 different bulletins here. 96 layer. So they are different, they're not the same. So just be wary of that. No, we're not doing that yet. All right, so we've come to the machine. We've verified the surge protector. We've verified power coming out of the wall into the machine. We've identified what board is installed on the CPU for a storage board. And we've ran the GXX diagnostics and recovery tool. The recovery portion of it is sometimes it will recover the machine and it'll boot back up. I'm yet to see it work. So this is going to lead us into our next, where we're going next. So we've done all the things I just said to get to where we're at. Now we have that information to troubleshoot. So let's say first that it has the old style storage board on it, the 96 layer. We've ran the tool and it says everything is okay. So immediately what you're gonna do is replace that board with one of the newer boards based on these bulletins, right? When you do that, you need to boot the machine up and do boot ROM first. So I asked earlier if everybody was familiar with boot ROM. You guys all said yes. I'm gonna cover it real quick and I'll verify that you guys are actually familiar with it. So you have to do the boot ROM before you do your firmware. I don't know if that's how you guys have been doing it or if you've been loading firmware and then doing boot ROM, but it will, one of 2 things will happen. It'll work, but you might have weird problems with booting, and you might get a lot of calls saying it takes forever to boot up. And again, that will be if you put a different version of boot ROM on with, like, let's say you have Q8 firmware and you put N5 boot ROM. That's going to be part of that problem. So anytime you update your firmware, you also need to update boot ROM because they go hand in hand.
The boot ROM tells the firmware how to load. It gives it a table of contents, I guess, for lack of a better term. So it knows exactly where to load and how to load in sequence.
So
if that's not there, it can get corrupted.
Correct.
So that's a different procedure than just putting a thumbstick in a working machine and updating the firmware.
You also need to update boot ROM.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
The key to that would be read and readme of the firmware.
Correct. So anytime you change firmware or upgrade, you should always be reading the PDFs. Sometimes firmware will break your machine, and in the PDF it would tell you that, or you need to change a dip switch or a soft switch, or it's for this in particular thing, but it fixes this but breaks this. So reading the PDFs are really important. I'll save you some of the trouble. I've read them all. P6 and Q8, if you have like a card reader or paper cut or some sort of external thing, anything other than just a plain Jane machine, you could have issues. You're gonna need to update your drivers, to print with your card readers. It's just, I've seen more breaks happen with P6 and Q8, but only if it has an external option. They lose communication and then it's a mess. So I've been saying N5 is pretty solid. It works with all the stuff. If you want to bring it to the latest version, again, you have to update all of your accessories, meaning your card readers, your drivers, all that stuff at the same time, if you wanted to update it. Otherwise, you're going to break it. So also in the PDFs, I don't know if you guys change your soft switches, your function versions with your firmware. Is everybody familiar with that? Soft switch 25. So they should all be running switch 25 at hex 30 for, I think that's version 2.2. All the machines should be set to that unless there's a specific reason of why not to. That'll prevent a lot of problems as well. So firmware's, kind of been a problem and a big deal. But as long as you do the boot ROM first, the firmware after, and make sure your function version level is correct, everything will be fine. Now, what happens is the other scenario is when you do the boot ROM, or if you try to load firmware, let's say you had that 96 layer, right? And you ordered the new one and now you've replaced it and you're trying to load firmware. You totally bailed on boot ROM because you didn't know about it, right? Most of the time you're gonna get an MFP controller NG. And then you're gonna call SSD and say, I ordered a storage board and now I can't load firmware. They're gonna tell you to replace a CPU or a base, or to keep on replacing stuff, which the reason that you're getting the NG is more than likely because you didn't install the version of boot ROM that needs to be incorporated with that firmware. So now you run into a problem where you order a CPU board, put that in, and you're still getting an NG, right? So the reason that happens is when you get an MFP controller NG, it's partially written firmware to the board, and then it failed. So now your board's corrupt. You can't rewrite firmware onto a corrupted board. It won't work. And if it does, your machine is going to be all out of whack. So that's, a big problem that's happening. So if you would have loaded the boot ROM first, it more than likely would have taken the MFP controller. Another thing that I've seen, and I don't have a reason why, but I can tell you this is what you need to do to make it work. I've been seeing that if you try to load firmware on everything loads but the MFP controller. And then once that fails, you never get it to load again, so you just keep replacing boards thinking it's going to fix it. What you need to do, is everybody familiar with the reset.tar file? The A789BE.tar.
It's a reset tool.
Correct. Yes?
I've used it, but not on the I-Series.
So that tool can be used on any 8 series and I-Series machine minus the desktop models. And so what you need to do, that gives you a clean slate. So if you get a firmware that fails, you need to run that so you can have a fresh slate to start so that it can take firmware. You can't write onto a corrupted board, but you can write onto a clean board. So that's the idea of running that tool. Anytime you get a failure, you need to clear out the corrupted data in order for it to take new data.
So I got one question.
Yes, sir.
Because I think Jason tried to touch on that. So we get a brand new machine in,
Mm-hmm.
we're setting it up, and we realize it's been sitting in a warehouse for a bit, it's got some old firmware on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I take N5.
Mm-hmm.
So you're telling me that in just a regular firmware update on a machine that's functional, it does not update the boot ROM for you?
No.
Why?
You have to manually input a series of keys.
Why?
Because Konic Minolta said so. So in the past, on the 8 series machines, we used to have an SSD board.
Yeah.
And you would order that, it'd come pre-programmed, plug and play, walk away. On the I-Series, done away with that. Now they send you a blank board. It is up to you to install the boot programming and the firmware. They do no longer come preloaded because they've changed everything.
So he's saying an existing machine, new machine,
Yep,
needs to be updated. That's all it needs.
yep.
But that boot ROM, again, is telling the firmware how to load it. So if it's a different version, it's not gonna know how to load the new version. And that's a manual load of the boot ROM.
Correct. Now, if that, let's say that machine's been sitting there for a while and you just pulled it out and you want to update the firmware, but it has the old style board, you have two choices. One, you can load any firmware up to J9 without boot ROM. This boot ROM comes in J9 and up. So any firmware below J9 on a 96 layer storage board, you can load, no problem. Take it all day long. Once you get to J9, you have to replace the board because the 96 layer won't take J9 or higher. So even if you try, it'll fail.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
You touched on that yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, we could
I
easily
think so.
have 96 layer boards out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And decide to update the firmware.
If you want to do that, you need to replace the board.
And I've never read that.
Just passed some weird printing issue
Mhm.
that was addressed in special firmware. Now you're adding 3-4 layers of confusion to the mess.
Depends what board's installed on that machine.
Only from the mind.
But see, I've never seen that documented even in the reading to replace the board or even to look at the board.
It's documented. There's a KBA article. I'll pull it up for you. Directly talking about this. I thought I had the bulletin.
Let's grab it for it. The other thing, Matt.
Yes, sir.
Does everybody know where to go and how to load the boot ROM?
Suits and special.
I had to do it on an I-series machine on one of the desktops recently, but I never had to do it before. Now this is just a new layer.
So maybe Matt, you can show everybody the process here.
So I'm going to pull that up right now. That bulletin directly talking about the J9 and what to do. See if I remember. Yeah.
Still the same.
Okay, so we're gonna pull up one-stop product support. We're gonna type in our C450i or 550, 650, 750, whatever it is you're working on. If you go to knowledge and type in, I believe, if you just type in boot, it'll pop up updating the boot program with J9. So this is the KBA, how to update the boot program J9 or newer. Here's the document.
I should download that, put it on that.
Yep, I should have had that on
Answer
there.
me this though. So if a new machine comes in that has the new storage board, then it should already have the updated boot ROM in it, right?
It'll have the boot ROM that matches the firmware that's on it.
Okay, so then any update after that, we have
Requires
to
boot
update the
ROM.
boot ROM with it.
Correct.
Now, answer me this. So if I'm updating a boot ROM that tells the firmware how to load, so when that thing updates, does it reboot the machine to then take the firmware?
Yes.
Okay, so now I've got a boot ROM that does not have matching firmware until I update it.
Correct.
And that doesn't cause problems.
No, because you have the thumb drive in the machine and you're booting it up back into the firmware screen.
Okay, so it's going to redo it automatically. Okay.
Well, you have to hold down the stop key, but yes, it'll reboot automatically and you should be there paying attention, hold the button, it'll boot back up into firmware, and then this is where this comes in. So this is how you do boot ROM. So you'll put your firmware in, you'll boot it up to the main screen, select your machine type select, and it'll bring you to this screen. You don't have to change anything. So the important thing here is, so I did touch on this, but I didn't have this document yesterday. You have the two keypads and you have the one in parentheses. On this one, you need to push 172938 and then hit OK. A lot of the times people will just do 172938 and they're like, oh, it didn't do anything. You have to hit OK. And then it'll go back to this screen. And instead of a start button, there'll be a button that says boot ROM. Hit boot ROM, hit start, takes 10 seconds. And now you've installed boot ROM.
You remember when we were trying to find the machine type for that one machine and like they never found it?
Yeah.
So I've ran into that as well. And that's going to be based on date and time range of the machine. So you have to get, because they update the manuals, so you have to get previous versions in order to get the machine types based on the age of the machine.
So is there a spreadsheet or some document that has a list of those I-series machines and just a simple document? with the machine types on, because we looked one time for dang near an hour just
Mhm.
trying to find somewhere where we could find what machine type it
What I would recommend is that you call SSD and tell them that you can't find the machine type. They'll find it for you and give it to you.
Okay.
But the way if you wanted to do it on your own, you'd have to go through each manual, each service manual,
Did.
to find which one has that type in there. That's the only way. Or you can call SSD and they'll do it for you. Whatever works for you.
So they list the machine types in certain models and not others.
Not certain models.
Versions of the service.
The versions of the service manual will change what the machine type will be because it's based off the serial number. So one version of the manual had serial numbers X through Z. And then when they redid the manual, it now has the serial numbers, Z through A or whatever. So
We had an H or an M and we couldn't find where.
Yeah, the difference is, easiest way for me to describe it is if you had, let's say, I'm going to go just like off 8 series, but if you had like a 258, 308, 368,
mhm.
and when you brought the section up into the manual,
Yep.
well, the problem is that the manual kind of goes, this is for like the whole range,
Yep.
and the first machine type you come to is for like a 658.
hmm
And you're going, well, I don't see my, you got to keep scrolling and scrolling until you see it.
Correct.
It's they're not all together in a single table. You got to keep looking and looking and looking until you find it.
Correct. Which goes hand in hand with all this information. It's scattered everywhere.
Yeah.
Just like that. So the idea is to, make sure you guys are aware of the information, put it all together into one thing so that you have it.
So, because this is important to me in the way that you guys upstairs work. Okay. So if I get a machine that is shipped to me higher than J9,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and it's Konic's recommendation. It's always tried to bend our policy to make sure that every machine goes out with the latest firmware. Okay, so now you're telling me anything above J9, the procedure is always going to be to update the boot ROM first, so that they can follow this guy, and then they put it and when it reboots, you're saying they got to make sure that they're holding stop at the time it reboots, so that it goes back into firmware to do the firmware. What happens if they miss the stop key? What happens?
It won't boot. It'll just stick at 25%.
Okay, so if I turn it off and back on, would I be okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
That way I don't have some guy.
And now going into what you're saying, if you're getting a machine that has N5 on it, it more than likely has the correct storage.
Yeah,
board.
I get that part. I'm just saying, so I can almost assure you, from where they don't know about this, so many machines that have come in greater than J9 have old boot ROM on.
Correct. And
And-
so I would say, are you experiencing problems with those machines?
And so now, and it's not even advisable really to go back and put updated boot ROM in it, right? Because it's
No, you can.
It'd be okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I was thinking you were
Yep.
saying that it calls,
If you get an MFP NG,
okay.
you need to do the boot ROM prior.
Okay.
The correct procedure is boot ROM firmware. People do it in their own combination and it'll work. Sometimes it doesn't. And that's kind of where you're like, oh, I need to order boards because it won't take firmware, or it works and the customer says this thing takes forever to boot up. It'll just be sitting there and, freeze up or whatever. If you're having issues, you need to verify your boot ROM and your firmware and your function version. For sure.
ROMs, because we come from a world where we didn't used to have to worry too much about the boot ROM.
Correct.
So with every version of firmware, is the boot ROM different?
Yes. And the boot ROM is built into the firmware. So it is not a separate download. It's when you download the firmware, the boot ROM's already in it. So when you upgrade, you're supposed to upgrade boot ROM as well. And I know that it hasn't been being done. And I think that's why these machines are bricking, is because eventually it just doesn't know what it just, you know, doesn't know what to
So
do.
everything they've updated upstairs,
Every
shipped out the
Oh,
door.
hell yeah.
It may be 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, we're having problems in the field.
Correct.
That's why.
Correct.
The video.
Yep, could be. And it could also freeze it up to where it now takes out your CPU or,
Oh, I guarantee you.
you know, because it's trying to, it's got one programming for this and another programming for this, and it's trying to negotiate them, you know, and it'll fit together and work, but eventually it breaks. And when it breaks other things. So-
Look at the boot ROM as the roadmap for where the firmware gets loaded, and then the sequence in which it loads and boots. When you get, let's say, it stops at 25%, that's because now it doesn't know where it's in this boot process, and it don't know what the next step is, or it can't find it because it doesn't have the right roadmap to get it there. And that's where it stumbles.
So a lot of the times is what I'm seeing is, like you said, they'll update the firmware and then reboot the machine and it gets stuck at 25%. And then they call SSD. SSD tells them to replace storage board, CPU, this and that and that and this, when really all you had to do was put the boot ROM on. So now you've installed 3 boards over the course of 2 weeks when all you had to do was install boot ROM.
So is all this information going to SSD all of a sudden?
Yes.
So when they call, it's like, did you update firmware? What do you need?
So that's the other problem.
Install the boot ROM first?
SSD should be asking the right questions, and depending on who answers the phone,
But it also is,
Coin flip.
your guys, you need to know what you have for them to know
Correct.
where to go.
correct.
If you're
So
not telling them the details, you don't tell them I got a 96 layer board.
they have no idea.
They don't know what, they might tell you the wrong thing. There's a good chance that could happen.
Yep.
You know, so you gotta have good feedback or good information to give you good feedback. And that's, we go down those rabbit holes.
Correct.
We're not, we count on our hotline to help out, and we're not trashing our hotline, but
Nope.
if they don't get the right information, it's hard sometimes for them to
Well, I've
give
had them ask, did you put the right boot ROM on it? Yeah, let's go. What's the next step?
Right.
And you really didn't, but
Correct.
because before it was always incorporated.
Right, you assume that.
Right. So that's what's happening, you know, and the SSD advisors, they don't know that stuff. You don't know, you need to tell them. They don't ask because they assume you already know. And that's how it all, so they'll give you information to troubleshoot, but you didn't give them all the information that they needed to send you down the correct path of troubleshooting. They're giving you a generic default troubleshooting path. So,
I was trying to figure out what they actually changed. I mean, if you look at a standard I-series, without me going and counting, there's probably been what, 12, 13 firmware releases at least, base. So, and I don't know how many of them are before J9, right? So firmware, no boot ROM needed. Firmware, no boot ROM needed. Firmware, no boot. And then all of a sudden, you hit a point and now you got to update it every single time. And of course, like I said, it's the first I've seen of it. I'm just wondering what has changed. You know, I'm just trying to think logically, what in the devil would have changed where now that they got to update this whole procedure, what's that boot ROM doing?
But that's your problem, is you're trying to think logically.
boot ROM.
Long enough.
I was gonna say, David, if you don't know after all this time, what do firmware makes? None.
Yeah.
So, but I think it has to do, and I'm speaking totally off my perception, but they, we're at a point now where they're utilizing firmware to troubleshoot or fix almost everything. Everything is, they can fix timing and all these different things they can resolve. So if it doesn't match up with the firmware, it may not do the proper thing. So rather than assuming that it's going to automatically load or put it into automatically load, say you load a firmware and now you need a special, maybe that's not compatible with that boot ROM, that type of thing. And that's why I think they separated it and make it a manual process.
Is there boot ROM with special firmware?
And you'll know, right? Because you're not going to be able to check somewhere to see if it has the boot ROM. It might be on the machine management list. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is, but I don't think there's any way for you to physically tell other than print out the list and look. But if you go to try to run through this procedure and you try to install it, it'll do one of two things. It'll either pop up a start button and let you hit start, or it'll say this machine is already updated with the latest boot ROM version. You don't need to do this, whatever the exact terminology is, I don't know, but it won't let you. If it already has it, it'll say you're good. You don't need to do this.
Okay.
If it doesn't, then you'll get a start button.
So whether you're doing base firmware or special firmware, you at least need to check the boot.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
I would go to machine type. I would go to this panel.
Just on the 96 layer board though, right?
Well,
No.
all of them.
All of them.
So, but you see the common denominator is when you have to load J9 boot ROM is when you install the 112 layer board.
Mhm.
So who knows, it could have something to do with the board and the way it's processing the data.
Was it the same boot ROM every step of the way up
Prior to, yeah.
J9?
Mhm.
After, once you put it to new style board, you gotta go J9 and.
Correct.
That's all they pulled, okay.
Same thing with the special firmware. I don't know what the cutoff is, but I would recommend you look at the date. Whatever the date is for J9.
We said right here.
Well, you'd have to look at the date when J9 was released.
Yeah.
You'd have to look at when J9 was released.
Mhm.
So if it was in 2021, we've had 2 years of machines going out improperly.
Which is probably why you guys are probably having issues with the I-Series machines.
If you're having it.
If you're having issues. I would assume that you are. I would assume because that's why we're doing this stuff everywhere. Because everybody, it's not just you, it's everybody, you know? So, and it's not anybody's fault. Nobody wasn't like addressed with the information when it came out. So nobody knows to do this stuff, and that's what's causing a lot of problems.
So if we go one that's not booting up 25%, should we do boot ROM first?
I would say.
Was that gonna fix it?
I mean, that's the
Sometimes.
easiest.
I would do the GXX tool first, the diagnosis and
It
recovery
says
tool.
okay on everything.
If it says okay on everything, verify what board you have in the machine. If it has 112 layer, go ahead.
Boot ROM.
Go ahead. Try your boot ROM and try your firmware.
Its either not matched up.
Yep. And it may resolve. It may shut off and come back up.
Now, if you do boot,
Mm-hmm.
if let's say we run into that scenario.
Yep.
And we update the boot,
Mm-hmm.
we have to do or reload the same firmware at that point.
I would recommend it.
It would make sense.
Mhm.
Because if you have something that's
So
crooked.
don't just update the boot and walk away.
Right.
No.
Update the boot and.
Boot and firmware go together. One doesn't go without the other.
Okay.
Ever. If you load one, you have to load the other. And you should, procedure-wise, load boot ROM first.
So don't go out and load boot ROM on those machines and walk away
No.
on the ones that are above J9 or J9 and above. Do both of them, then walk.
Correct, because on the firmware that you have, you're going to have the boot ROM already in it. And really, you're booting up to the firmware screen. This process takes maybe 10, 15 seconds. Where firmware takes, I don't know, a minute. You know what I mean? So this is
The
quick.
problem's going to be trying to find all those machine types.
Right. So you don't have to change the machine type.
That should be already be.
That stuff stays the same. Yeah.
Unless you're putting a baseboard in or something. right?
CPU.
CPU.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct. So if I was going to update firmware, the first, again, if you're having an issue, again, one with firmware, I don't go around just updating machines just for the fun of it. Once we put a machine out in the field, it stays the way it is until it's broke. And then we attempt to fix it using firmwares and things like that. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You don't need to go updating everything, to the latest, because you're probably going to create more problems than anything. I would do it on a break fix basis. When I was at a machine that was broken, if I had to replace something then I would make sure everything was up to date.
See, that's a different direction than what we've been told previously.
Correct. Correct.
See, us old school guys would say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yep.
And then it was like, that firmware's kind of dated. Why didn't you update it?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a different thought.
Another thing about updating firmware, let's say it's out of date, like you said. I've had a ton of calls at SSD where they try to go to the latest version, breaks the machine.
Smaller printers.
You cannot jump. I would never recommend more than 2 versions at a time. You can, whatever you're at, you can go 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, as far up as you want. And then when you get to J9, if you're below that, you'd have to replace that and then go boot firmware. Then you can go 2, the same thing. But if you jump, let's say you jump from the bottom right to the latest before J9, it's more than likely going to take something out. And the weird part about it is I've seen it take out like the scanner drive boards. Just so weird, because you'll get you'll get a finisher NG or you'll get an ADF NG. And that's because you jumped way too many versions of firmware, and you've now you got to replace your scanner drive board and your finisher control board.
Yeah, we pretty much always learn to try to step them up, or at least read to see if there's any restrictions or guide. And I said, well, you got to be at least here first before you go to here.
And then your customer is extremely mad because you went in, it was working, you updated firmware and broke it, and now you need boards.
Yeah.
That's
The same thing though is it changes the way it's loading in the roadmap of it by jumping too many layers, and it may not sync those pieces up properly, and that's where it gets broken.
Yep.
And then and that's where when we say there might be corrupt data, that's where it gets corrupted. Because it doesn't know where it's fitting in the boot sequence, or even the function sequence. So you kind of have to.
Well, I hate to be a pessimist, but now you've taken a 30-minute call and you made it a 3-hour call.
But
It all pays.
you're not going to have to go back there 10 times. So it's just like on production. You spend the time while you're there all day long. I don't care what it takes. You do all you got to do so that you don't come back next week. You know, don't replace one drum, replace 4. I mean, I don't know how you guys operate, but that's what I did. If one drum was bad, the other 3 are coming soon, and I don't got time to come back next week. You know, so if I want to update a machine, I'm going to take the time, I'm going to order the board, I'm going to run through this procedure, I'm going to take a half a day and spend on this machine so that I don't have to come back next week. And by doing that, I ended up having almost 50 production machines across New England that I took care of by myself, because I was pretty much on a schedule of doing PMs every 2 weeks at different locations. So at a certain point, we got to where I was only going there once a month just for PMs. That was it. Because we took the time here. We took the 3 hours to save that.
Hold up. Can I get a microphone so you can preach it?
Got one right here.
He's got the video. Hey, John. You paid it?
Yeah, those 15-minute calls.
So we had a thing going that you should do a total call every time that you're there. You should never spend less than an hour. If you walk into this machine and go, do, fixed, have a good day. You're not doing your job. I'm sorry. You're not. You should clean this machine. Biggest thing that I have, when I get called on site, it makes me so angry, is I'll open this thing up, and it's just the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my entire life. That you have no idea what that does to me internally. For no reason whatsoever should these machines be dirty. I know you're busy. I know you got calls stacked up and all that. Like I explained to my kids, man, when we clean up, how long did it take us to clean this up? 10 minutes? 15 minutes? And look, even if you didn't fix it, at least they're like, wow, that looks good. You know what I mean? If nothing else, clean it. Make it look good. You know, if you get your car work done, you want it clean when you get it back, right? It looks great. You know, so same concept, man. Take 45 minutes, even if it's a simple setting change, you know, pull it out, check your drums, check your ITB, check what storage board's in it so that you have a mental note of what you're getting yourself into next week or the week after, you know, and if you're just coming in and doing this and leaving, you're going to have a hard time doing your job. I'm sorry, but you are.
Did you catch that he was a preacher also?
I am a preacher. Yes.
Give him the mic.
I'm a preacher for Konic Minolta.
No.
Did you say that in the first meeting?
No. You guys are a special group. So I mean, you got to take the time. What you put into it is what you're going to get out of it, and it's 100% true. One thing I'll tell you about Konic Minolta, there is a step and there is a procedure for everything, steps 1 through 10. And as ridiculous as it may sound, and I used this example yesterday, if step 1 says turn the power machine on and step 2 says spin around like this, you have to do it or it's not going to work. I promise it won't work. You have to do the steps exactly as they're shown, step by step by step by step. You can't skip from 1 to 3 to 5 to 7 to 11. It'll work for a little while, but you're going to be back there like, what the hell's wrong with these I-Series machines? Suck. But it's not the machine. It's everything that led up to it getting set where it was set. Okay? Does anybody have any questions about anything that we've covered up to this point?
We've had with these I-Series machines, I mean, I hate to go back to coding, but was there information like this?
Probably not. So,
No.
I mean, again, through COVID, every manufacturer, us for sure, different plants shut down. So we had to switch from this manufacturer for boards to this manufacturer for boards. They're not all apples and apples. I mean, sources changed through those 3 years for sure. And that's where a lot of these changes come from. And the engineers who are way smarter than me for sure have to figure out, what they need to do to make this board work properly. And if it's load loop around manually, that's what they're asking us to do. We can argue it, but if that's what it needs to do to work, then that's what we need to do.
Then like you were saying, so now we have to spend an hour now doing this for firmware? Unfortunately, yes.
And it might not be as bad. I don't think it's going to be bad as you think it is.
It's not.
Going to be, or your mind is saying right now. You'll find out. But the key is when you go to a machine, take a look at it and see where it's at. And earlier on, I don't know if Matt said it, I may have missed it, I may have walked out, but the more you document what you do at a machine, so that if we do get called in, you have an understanding, I put this board in first, I put that in next, that type of thing, and you can give that to us. It helps us troubleshoot instead of not knowing anything that you did, and there have been 3 boards put in, you don't know what the sequence was, which one was it that you put in first, that kind of thing. Because a lot of times, and from experience, the original board is never really a problem, and we can put that back in, use that data to recover the machine and get it going. Where if that board is gone, and that's why I was talking about not returning it too soon, if that board's gone, we don't have that data to recover, then we have to rebuild the machine.
Yep. And that's a process. Probably take us all day.
And I guess Matt ran on doing a complete call. We're seeing it more and more now on our production gear, that complete calls really aren't being done and the machines aren't running reliably, and that's a big part of that problem. So we're trying to get in front of that as well. But
Correct.
that's a different story for another day. That's Roger's gig.
Exactly. So everybody's clear, up to this point. You all feel good, comfortable? Okay.
Break?
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, take a break, and then we'll pick this up. All right. So this is going to go into the next part. We talked about everybody remembers everything that we went over up to this point, right? Trying to keep you all with me here.
I'm trying to forget it.
Don't forget, please. So now we're going to go into another scenario where the machine won't boot to firmware, which you guys have all probably seen. You put your thumb drive in, it just boots up normally, or it'll just sit there at 25% and it does nothing. So one of 3 things. One, KBA recommended USB flash drives for the I-Series. If you don't have one of these, ask your manager to get you one. That is the recommended USB drive to use. You can use the ones that you have, however, you're gonna have to reformat the drive. Does everybody know about the HP USB format tool?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, so you need to, run that tool on your thumb drive and then reformat it using the command prompt, and it'll give you all the directions in the PDF on how to do that. There's a KBA article for that. Everybody's familiar with it and how to use it and how to do it?
I do have a question.
Yes.
Okay, because I know that drives up to 32 gigs for FAT32.
Yep.
Anything above FAT32 is an extended FAT. And I know I don't even suggest them for use in a machine, period. Now, if I was to take a bigger drive, 64, 128, and did format at FAT32, Do you think it would work or do you think it would fail?
Fail.
Now, is the drive limited as to the size of the drive it can access?
Yes.
What's the maximum?
I believe it's 8 gig.
Then how does the 16 work?
Or 16, I'm sorry, that's the
Okay.
max. The 2 recommended is the 8 and the 16. That's your max.
Okay.
This is what's recommended to use all the time. It's the more common one, 8 gig. You can use the 4. I think the 2 is too small. 2 gig doesn't work.
Yeah.
4 gig works. 8 is recommended. 16 is max. That's that. Doesn't have to necessarily be this brand.
Yeah.
But as long as you run through that format tool, it should work.
Now to give you an idea, now, this leads to another thing that you guys, if you even went up to a customer yesterday, may have been asked about this. Flash drive in a machine for scan and print.
Mhm.
Is there a maximum size?
Same.
So in other words, if a customer has a 32 gig thumb drive, they plug it in the machine and want to scan or print from it,
It may not work.
it may not work. So you're saying 16 is max.
I would.
Okay.
Yep, just
So-
because that's what's written in all of the documentation.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, now to give you an idea, that's what I put our customer in with 16 gig drive.
Mhm.
And I told them I didn't recommend or suggest anything above that.
Mhm.
But I do know that the machine should recognize FAT32, which the 32 gig drives may work. But
There's no reliability or guarantee.
okay. So it is limited to the size that it will address.
Yes. 8 and 16 is guaranteed. And if it doesn't work, then we can further dive into that. If you're using something outside of the parameters, it's use at your own will, use at your own risk.
Is there a reason why they do that?
Well, it's going to have to do with the OS. It's in the machine as to what it can, access and allocate.
I mean, that's the way that it's kind of been since I've been in Konica for the last 8 years, and it hasn't really changed much.
But the point I was getting to, so when I went to order these drives for the customer, okay, the smallest drive that I could find, okay, without going to a retail store and paying an arm and a leg, is now 16 gigs.
Mhm.
And just about anything above that now is pushing, you know as well as like 64, 128, 256.
Yep.
I wonder if the next machine out, forget this one, but if they will allow it to see something bigger.
Dale?
Could happen. I don't know that. I think it has to do with the technology that's being used and the manufacturers that are building the boards.
These smaller drives are getting incredibly hard to find unless you
Right.
find some Chinese knockoff, which I wouldn't
Correct.
dare use. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
They're just unreliable.
Yep.
So,
16 is pretty solid. I mean, if you can get an 8, I know that they like them better. I never really had an issue with an 8.
Okay.
All right.
well, at least now I know. I mean, I can express this to the sales staff.
And this is written, I mean, this is in the service manual under your product specifications. It's all in there. This is a KBA article that they wrote in regards to that. So verifying you have the correct thumb drive and using the HP USB tool are going to be your 2 most common problems to get you to boot firmware. The other one that we've seen is the interface cable that connects the control panel to the baseboard. There's been a lot of shorts in that cable. And if you call SSD, they'll tell you to replace the panel. And you replace the panel, doesn't fix your issue, and here we go again. So it's the interface cable, and if you go into the parts menu and you look, they've updated the part number. So anytime that you see the part number updated, if it ends in 00 or 01, 02, 03, 04, and so on, it's because they did a revision to that part. So the interface cable, I think there's 2 revisions of it now, so I think it's like an 03. So be conscious when you're ordering stuff from the parts manual, try to get the latest one. So I ran into an issue where I would order an 03 and they'd give me an 00 because that's what they had on the shelf. It'll work, but you're probably going to end up experiencing the same problem down the road because it was never fixed and you're just replacing the cable with the same cable. So try to get the later versions.
So was that just a cable not manufactured to the specs originally, or?
I don't know the specifics of it. All I know is that there's been a constant short. It's been shorting out, and it causes the panel to look all weird, or it'll cause the panel to just not even display at all. Machine will come up, you'll hear it gear and all that stuff, but your panel's just dead. Okay. So that's pretty much, if you can't get to the firmware screen, it's one of those 3 reasons. If you're on site and you have a good drive and you can use it on another machine, you know it's good, try to plug it directly into the baseboard and bypass the interface cable, because that'll still work, just like on a 4 series. So those are your options for firmware. If you can't get past it, revisit this, because this is the only way that it's not going to let you get past it. Okay. This is the reset file. I'm pretty sure you guys said you're familiar with it, but this is the documentation that tells you how to use it. So you put it on your thumb drive with nothing else on the thumb drive, put it in the machine. Same process as firmware. Hold stop, turn it on. First 10 seconds, you get a white screen, says data initialization complete. Shut the machine off, repeat the process 2 more times. So you do it 3 times in a row, back to back to back. Now, I will tell you, there's been instances where we couldn't get the firmware to load and we ran the reset tool and it still wouldn't work. We had to run it again, because remember, every time that it fails, you have to clean it or you're not going to be able to load firmware. So I've had to do it up to 6 times, 3 times failed, 3 more times passed. So don't be afraid to do it twice, and try it. Now, the other part of it, let's say you do all of that stuff and you still getting an MFP-NG. At that point, this is when you make your first call to SSD. So you see all the work that we did before we even got them involved. So when you call them and they say, what have you done so far to fix the issue? That's why it's good for you to have this all detailed out. So you can say, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this, because if not, they're gonna make you do all this again, right? And then once you tell them that you've done all of this stuff and you've gotten to this point, the 1 of 2 things is gonna happen. 1, you need to force a storage partition, which you need to have SSD on the phone to do. Or 2, they're going to put you on hold and bump you up to next level. Because when you call, you get entry level support. So they're going to, basically you need to cover all your bases, because that's what level 1's going to do. Level 2's really going to diagnose, troubleshoot. So that's, again, trying to shorten the downtime that you guys have and not just waiting to order parts, put them in and it not work. So there's a lot of things you can do before we even need to order a part. Yes, sir.
Kind of on the question, we've had problems with the Protect phone number going through.
Yeah.
We've had to call
Been
the regular
disconnected.
800. Have they given the new number yet?
You don't have it yet. That's the problem. So here's that was create another, kick off another firestorm for you. So the Protect, as of March 31st, the Protect recognition went away for 2022. We haven't achieved 2023 yet. We actually just sent it in today, just finished it. So that's why, so that the phone number for Protect dealers came off, I want to say just in June, it just stopped it, and then the new number for 2023 is now available. So the dealers that had 2022 are for all intent purposes, that number is no good anymore until you get 2023.
So we ought to have it soon.
Soon, yeah, we literally just completed it yesterday. The training was met. I think the last guy, it was a web training needed to be done, that was just finished.
And then we did the inspections.
Right, so that was submitted, Roger just submitted it, I have to approve it, and then it gets final approval. Once it's final approval,
Then we get to that.
publish.
So just use the 800, 825 by 664.
That's it.
All right. So firmware doesn't work. We run the reset. 3 times, still doesn't work, you call SSD, you need to force a storage partition. You have to call SSD because that's a special 7-digit code that you input on the firmware screen, and it'll bring you to a storage partition, but you only do that on a last resort basis because it's going to wipe out your counters. It's going to completely reset this entire machine, so you'll have to let like your office know counters are reset back to 0, had a fatal failure, yada yada yada, so that they can get that adjusted for you. If you do end up having to run the storage partition, the reason that you need SSD on the phone is because of everything that you're going to need to do after. I can't share this document, but I'm going to go over it with you real quick. If you have to force a storage partition, what's going to happen? You're going to reboot the machine. It's going to come up with a CD073 error, and it's going to say that the serial number must be entered. So you have to go into service mode, and there's a bunch of stuff you have to do. I'll cover it real quick with you because you're not going to do this on your own. You're going to need SSD to walk you through this. So you have to put in the serial number, you have to set the date and the time zone, you have to reset your marketing area, reset your fax, change your dip switches. There's 3 different sets of switches you have to change, reinstall your ADF, reset your storage type. So, I mean, it's a whole procedure, and that's what we're talking about when I say we have to reconfigure the machine, and it takes us pretty much the first half of the day getting everything in and the other half of the day doing all this. So if you get to this point, you're going to be there for a little while doing this stuff. And that's, once you put the boards in and stuff, when I was in SSD, when they called in after the storage board replacement and they couldn't get firmware to load, some people will tell you to order and replace the CPU board. Me personally, I would force a storage partition. One time did it not work. And I mean, I averaged between 20 and 26 calls a day at SSD, 5 days a week. So it didn't work once. So I would, if you get to that point where you replace the storage board with your new 112 layer storage board, the most common thing that causes it is the forcing the storage partition. Yeah. So I would have them always force the storage partition after the storage board if it didn't work. Reason being, if this machine had a 96 layer storage board on it and you put the 112 layer storage board on it, and it doesn't happen all the time, but in some cases you can't get it to load firmware. It'll just keep saying MFP-NG, no matter what you do. Before you move on replacing CPU boards, baseboards, and all that good stuff, call SSD and tell them you'd like to partition the storage board. Because what you're doing is same thing as running the reset tool on the CPU board. When we clear that out, forcing a storage partition completely wipes out that board. So what happens is sometimes you'll get those new boards, put them in, and there's some sort of data on them already, and that it won't take. Running the reset doesn't clear your storage board, it only clears your CPU board. You can't access service mode to do a format because you can't get in. So the only thing you can do is force a storage partition that way. And that'll manually wipe it. Once that's complete, so again, this would be the process. You would run the tar file 3 times, 1, 2, 3. Force a storage partition, because if it fails and you do the partition and try to load firmware, it's going to fail again because it'll never load until you have a clean slate. So that's a misconception too. At SSD, they will say, okay, run the partition and reboot it and try to load firmware, and you still get an NG. It's because you didn't do the tar file first. So then they'll tell you to replace the CPU board.
So it's a waste of time to do the partition if you never get the reset tool to give you an okay, right?
Correct.
Okay.
If the reset tool doesn't give you a white screen within the first 10 to 15 seconds, it's something to do with your thumb drive. I've seen the reset tool work and firmware not, where the machine won't boot up to firmware, but the reset tool works all day long. So the reset tool is pretty bulletproof, should work. just know, and I don't know if everybody at SSD does that process. Everybody does things their own way. I have found the best success in running the reset tool 3 times, then forcing the partition, then loading firmware on the MFP only, and then the rest of the accessories. I have seen where we've done the reset, done the partition, and tried to load everything, fails. You got to do it all over again. So to eliminate all of having to do this multiple times, just do it that way and it'll work. Or you can troubleshoot yourself and try it, whatever works for you, but that's what I found works. So that's everything that I would do before I attempted a CPU. Unless it had the new storage board already, then I'd already be looking at a CPU. If it had the old, I'd be working on a storage board this entire time, all the way up to this point, to the partition, before I ever replaced the CPU. So you're gonna have a lot of work to do right out of the gate with the storage board. And by the time you get through everything that I just did, and you get to the partition, if it's still down, then it's a CPU issue. But that's on a rare, this many times compared to this many, you know? There are those rare instances though where weird things happen. And, you know, there's nothing we can do about it. So everybody, any questions about any of that? No? Good? Good. Okay. So before we go on to this one, I'm going to give you a quick test, right? So when you get to the machine, what's the first thing you need to do?
Identify the storage.
Correct. After you identify what storage board is installed in the machine, what are you going to do next?
Check for the power, the circuit protector, for the voltage.
Correct. Correct. After that, what are you going to do?
You're gonna load boot ROM and then form.
Wrong.
Okay.
Anybody?
I had you go get your phone.
He was doing good.
I mean, you know, I'm new. I
Yeah.
was to get one wrong. But I was gonna go. You were on it. I was going for it.
GXX tool.
GXX2.
Diagnosis and recovery. Based on what that says is what you're going to do unless it says all okay. If it says all okay, then you're going to use what you did in the beginning, determining which board you have. It's going to determine what you're going to do next and which troubleshoot procedure you're going to go down. That will save you so much time, parts, travel, money, customer being mad, you guys being aggravated. Okay, so from there, I'm going to move on to this. So C550i, and I'm specifically talking about the C550i only. Has everybody seen this where you go to get firmware and it will say with memory or without memory? Does everybody know how to tell if the machine has memory or not?
Serial number.
Correct. So Konica put out a bunch of machines when they did the C550i's without memory, and then they put out a bunch, they started putting the memory in it so that it didn't, if it doesn't have it, it's a UK 115 memory upgrade kit, which I believe Konica will warranty, but don't quote me on that. But I think they will because they didn't put it in with the machine and it's an after fact. It's fine to have the machine without memory or with memory, standalone. It doesn't really matter. What's gonna matter is if you have to hook up a Fiery to it. It has to have A800 memory. So if you have a C550i without memory, you need the UK 115, which is the A800 memory, a wire to connect it, and there's one more, and a bracket. And that's all it is. So you need these parts right here. So the way to tell is by the serial number. So the machines that end right here. So the ones that have memory, it's going to be AA7P whatever 0 or AA7P 7, and it's going to be in that location. So, you know, if this was a 550i and you popped it out, you could tell just by the serial number what firmware you need to install. That way you're not breaking the machine, or it's not working, or you get an MFPNG, and you don't have the reset tool, and then it won't take firmware, and you see how it just...
Pertains to fire. Well, it only pertains to the 550i.
It only pertains to the C550i. That is it.
And if you're gonna hook up a fire,
You have to get the UK 115 if it doesn't already have it installed.
But that's not something we typically do. I mean, we've got a few, but it's been a long time.
And the reason that I cover it is not for you guys installing the Fiery, it's distinguishing which firmware you need to download.
Yeah.
That's the reason why we're covering it. So that's how you tell between those. This is probably for like your setup guys. If you're setting up the Firies, big thing that I've seen happen all the time, and I have to go out all the time to fix it. When you install the A800 UK 115, there's a connector where that board goes. There's a CPU board, right? The A800 connects to the CPU board, and there's a ribbon cable at the top that's connected to the baseboard. On certain UK 115s, depending on which model C550i you have, that ribbon cable needs to come out and plug into the A800 when you have a Fiery. Not without, only when you have the Fiery, that cable needs to be unplugged from the baseboard and plugged into the A800. It'll come up, it'll connect, but when you print, it'll print like blank pages. And they're like, oh, what is going on here? And literally it's just the ribbon cable. So no, you'll know because the plug on the A800 will either be bigger than the ribbon cable or it'll be the exact same size. If it's the exact same size, it needs to come out and go in there. If it's big, don't worry about it. Any questions about the UK 115? So yeah, I guess, see, there it is. You can get a credit if you email Service Ops 1 because they didn't put it in the machine.
Only if you're putting
The Fiery, correct. If you were adding the Fiery, you can get the UK 115 and get credited for it. But if it has no memory, you can't just say, hey, I want an A800 and get credit for it. It's not gonna work. Any questions about that? Okay. Also, I'm going to cover this real quick too. This is the best practices guide. Has everybody seen this before? This is located on my Konic Minolta under One Stop. Basically what this is at SSD, we got calls every single day for these things. So to eliminate the call volume, they created a best practices guide and put all of those common issues in here. So this is going to be good for you. Like marketplace application on the panel. A lot of people don't want it. It tells you how to shut it off. How to fix if your HDD, your hard drive's unset, which is your storage board. TX errors with faxing. How to change it back to classic screen. Adjust the operation panel. Just, you know. And here's one. Stuck at 25% on the progress bar after storage board was replaced. So it's right there. This will tell you pretty much what I went over with you. So has everybody replaced the CPU board before? So sometimes when you reboot it, you should get the CD3C0 and you should get the recover data button. If you wait too long and don't hit that button and it goes away, you're done. It's over. The only way to get it back is to run the reset tool 3 times and then let it reboot. It'll come up into an internal error. It must reboot itself 3 times before it'll show you this. If you let it reboot once, shut it off, turn it on, it restarts the clock. So you literally have to wait for it to go beep, 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 shut down and come on 3 times. And if you don't, you'll be there all day waiting for this imaginary button to come. So sometimes it doesn't pop up and the machine will just boot up and ready to copy. You're good to go. If this error pops up and that button's there, you need to hit it, I think within like 5 seconds or something, or it goes away. And then that'll recover the data and then the machine will reboot and come up ready to copy. So just keep that in mind. Every time that I turn it on after I've done a board replacement, pay attention to what's going on the panel, because you don't want to miss it. Otherwise, you have to do that and then wait again. So it's just more time that you're standing there. So that's important. We're not going over wireless. So I'll cover this with you real quick, but this is going to be something that you're going to have SSD do for you. If you're having issues, you can send them your machine management list, and we can put it into this, and it'll tell us what switches are default and what have been changed. Sometimes that has a lot to do with what's going on with the machine, so you may need to do that. But again, you're not calling SSD until you've done all of this stuff. So really, when you call, you have two major things. One, check my DIB switches. Two, storage partition. That's really, other than that, you've already covered everything on your own. Whether it be the storage board based on the information from the beginning, or you have a good storage board and a bad CPU. And you need to understand that and be able to recognize the difference, or you're going to continue to have problems with the I-Series. And so finally, what I've got for you here, this has been another problem. The dreaded C255, 4, 5, 6, and 7 error codes, or 2551, whatever it may be, for low density and abnormal TCR. Have you guys experienced this issue?
Yes.
Once or twice.
And what was your resolution for fixing it?
Well, after I figured out the daggone plate falls off, I started putting the plate back on, but
Correct.
other than that,
So there was a problem with sub-hopper assemblies. KBA, or Konica, it got escalated to KMI. KMI is still working on a resolution. They put out a KBA article as a temporary fix, which is why we have that taken apart right there so that you can actually see it, touch it, see what it is. A couple things you need to check. So before we dive into that, there's two problems that'll cause those error codes. And this is the same on your desktop models as it is on here. And it's the high voltage board, the high voltage contacts, and the DV contacts. When the machines are shipped, they're shipped from Japan to California, across the ocean, water, corrosion, moisture. They put this coating on all the stuff, which prevents it from making a good contact. So the way that you're gonna distinguish which problem that you have is you're either gonna get low TCRs or replace toner messages. That's gonna be because of your sub-hopper. If your prints come out and they look fine, but you're still getting the code, it's gonna be your sub-hopper. If your prints are coming out and they're light, extremely light, then it's going to be related to your high voltage. So you can take the back cover off, take the high voltage board out. There's 4 contacts for the high voltage drum units, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then there's 4 connectors for the DV, but they're on one block with 4 springs. These are 4 individuals. So you clean those springs with like a Scotch-Brite or sandpaper or whatever, you know. Clean them up, scuff them up, make sure that they're clean and good. Most of the time what happens is from shipping and driving, they bounce around and there's a pin, there's 2 grids, right? And then the spring contacts those 2. So bouncing it around, it'll do that. And you're not getting a good connection. So a lot of the times, if you take that apart, clean it all, when you reset your board, you have to go through all 4 of the top and all 4 of the bottom with like a tweaker flathead. Make sure each side of the springs are getting contact on both of those bars. I've been kind of just gently pushing on them to bend them, reform them in slightly so that it gets a better contact, but be careful because you can snap them. So cleaning them, bending them, getting good contact, verifying you have contacts on all locations, put it back together, your density should come back, no problem. Now, if it ran too long like that, it more than likely depleted your developers because it was getting an incorrect charge, so the developer is just going into your waste toner. So you can remove the waste toner take your screwdriver, stick it in it, pull it out. If it's covered in developer, you know you need developer because it's been pulling it out. And even if you fix it, you're never going to get your TCR levels where they need to be without a new developer. Anytime you run into this problem, you're going to need a new developer. I've been around and had one technician put 8 developers in a machine and want credit for it. And we're like, why didn't you stop after the first 2, maybe? Why would you keep putting developers in, right? And so don't do that, okay? Bring one with you and do the HV stuff and pull the sub hopper, because regardless, whichever color is affected, you have to replace that developer because it's contaminated, the TCR ratio is not correct, and it's not going to print right. So you need a new developer and do your HV stuff, and then you're going to remove the sub hopper. So we're going to go over here. And we've had a problem with these. I was at an account a few weeks ago. We ordered a new one, put it in, same problem. Ordered another one, put it in, same problem. We ended up taking them apart and they all came broke. So what breaks is this piece right here. So all it does, and you can see how easy this is it pops out.
I think a good solution would be just put a retaining clip on it.
Pops out. See how easy that happens? And then now you're over. So it's never gonna add toner and it's just gonna suck all the developer out until you have no more developer. You can take this all apart, clean it all up. Problem fixed. Once you get this back on the pin. I've had techs tell me that they've been reforming these so that it doesn't pop off. Because like I said, we've ordered replacements and they've come popped off, or you put it in and it pops off. So KMI is currently working on redesigning this so that to prevent it from happening, but go ahead and see how easy it comes off. I mean, it's nothing holding it there really. Just sits on a peg. And then this auger goes, right? So this thing will move like this and it'll just literally, boop. It's so easy to do. And then you get these errors, you need a new developer. And if you don't get a developer and you just do that, it's gonna do the same thing.
JB Weld.
I'm not gonna say anything. You guys do what you want, that's the problem.
JB Weld.
Put your JB Weld on there.
Put them there, it's not gonna allow it to move.
You gotta be careful how much you put on.
Oh my God.
A little dabble.
So I haven't seen, I think if you go in the part manual, like I was talking about how the numbers change at the end, I'm pretty sure you'll see like a 1, 2, 3, and maybe even a 4 for this because it's been revised multiple times.
But it's still
But
a
it's
problem.
still the same thing, right?
Correct. So it's in KMI engineering under development. They're working on a solution. This KBA article says this is the temporary fix until KMI redesigns that.
Well, what's wrong with taking the keeper off, getting these extra keepers, or can you?
So I don't think it's going to snap onto that peg though, is the problem. There's no groove. So if you have a keeper, it's just going to fall off.
I don't think that keeper uses a groove, does it?
I think it does.
It does.
Oh,
There you go. There you go.
That's fine.
I think you're
It's fine. I don't think you guys are reusing it. So yeah, JB welded.
No, you can probably take your soldering iron and just touch it.
Whatever you want to do.
just use your normal paper
Absolutely.
clip.
What I would recommend is if you run into this problem, you need to order a developer for whatever color you're having the issue with. Could be multiple colors, could be just one. Check your high voltage in the back, clean them, make sure they have good contacts. When you order this and you get it, you must take it apart and verify this. Pretty much 8 out of 10 come like that. So you order it, put it in, and you're like, didn't fix my problem. So they start thinking other things. And then in the end, we order another one of those, fixed.
Our wall's clean.
So yeah, when you get it new, it's clean. It doesn't look like that. So you can actually, you know, take it apart and not get dirty.
You just spread it a little bit.
Yeah, and it's not hard. It's just 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 screws, and it just comes apart. The other thing I want to point out, which is in that picture right there, is this. So if you pull the original one out and you say you want to get them up and going, if you can, what you need to do is check these, right? Make sure that these pins go back on where they're supposed to, and then these sensors, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what happens? Those sensors get dirty, and it doesn't actuate. It can't tell that the sensor's being blocked. So if you take it out, usually you'll see these things are caked. You just clean it all off nice, make it all beautiful, verify the pins and stuff are connected, put it back in, life's great. But you still need a new developer. Because by this time, for it to throw an error code, it's already depleted. That's why it's recognizing it. In one rare case, well, not rare, but in small amount of cases. So on the 8 series, they used to have the front side board behind the waste toner where the developers plugged in. On the I series, they changed it. Stop it. They changed it on the I series. It is now the expansion board. Is everybody familiar with the expansion board? So it's on the back right of the machine. The developers and stuff now plug into that. So if you pull it up and check your TCR levels and they read 0, it's more than likely the board, not this. Because we went through troubleshooting, replacing these, replacing this, that, all, you know, replace the wiring, all sorts of stuff, right? And it ended up being the expansion board was bad.
You cut tire wraps?
The whole 9. We were there for days. And what was weird though is so we ended up figuring it out with, guess what? A multimeter, right? We put it on and we weren't getting the proper voltages. Yeah. But it actually stemmed further than that because we weren't getting the proper voltages from the power supply. So the power supply wasn't feeding the correct voltage to the expansion board, which caused, it was a mess, but that's what the result was. So if you see TCRs reading flat out 0s and you know you just put a brand new developer in it, check that. There's 4 connectors for each one, and you should get 3.3 volts out of, I think, one pin on, it's like a 4-pin connector. You should have 3.3 volts on all 4. And if you don't, or if it's fluctuating, then you know you need to do that. Any questions about this?
No.
So when you get to this situation, unfortunately, until they put out a new one, you need to take it apart and verify it's connected. Otherwise, you don't want to do it after, because that's what you have to deal with. And I would probably advise, whatever your technical mind wants you to do to keep that pin on without affecting anything else, you know, use your best logical judgment and go for it. Because if you put it in, it could fall off. It's a problem, we know it, it's being addressed.
Wow.
Yep. Okay, any questions? Good? Okay, so we'll go back up here. What I got, everything that I just went over with you today, I have on a thumb drive. I've given to them. They're going to send it out to you guys. You also should have gotten an email with my contact information. I ran out of business cards yesterday. I have more at my house, but that's really far away. So you're going to get all that, huh?
Fayetteville, huh?
North of Fayetteville. So I'm north of Fayetteville, south of Rocky Mount.
Who's fun?
Yep, it was 105 when I left. I came up here, I'm like, it's 80, I'm cold, man. This is great. So yeah, you'll have my contact information. If you have any questions, if I don't answer, leave me a voicemail. You can shoot me an email. I'm, not gonna be able to be like your personal assistant. You still need to follow through procedures, call SSD, you know, once you have a ticket open and you have a ticket number, if you can say, hey, Matt, I have a request ID, blah, 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 blah. I don't feel good about what they're telling me. Can you take a look at it? You know what I mean? Because when you call, I know everybody at SSD personally, so I can tell just by the name on the ticket as to what information you're getting. So, you know, I have no problem. Once you
call bull crap.
I won't tell you. I'm not going to say anything, but I'll help you out. So yeah, you know, I have no problem taking a few minutes to help you out just on a personal conversation. But I mean, anything deeper than that, you need to have a ticket open and a request number so that I have something to look at and something to go with. So when you run into this and you run through all this, if you have questions while you're doing it, call me, email me, text me. If I don't answer, I'll get right back to you. If you have issues and you call SSD to do the partition and you just don't feel like you're getting anywhere with them, or you just don't feel confident in what they're telling you and what you're doing, like I said, shoot me an email with the request number and be like, hey, is this accurate? And I can take a look at it and be like, no, don't do that. Back up. You know what I mean? So it'll save you guys the headache, the time, and just trying to make your jobs easier. And the problem is all this information has been around. It's just scattered everywhere and nobody told you when to use it, what to use it on, how to use it, what to do. And so that's the gist of it. So you guys...
The information on like the CCD thing?
CCD, what I know about the CCD, there's been issues. I know a lot of issues with the cabling. CCD units, I haven't really had too many problems.
There's like a, I read a bulletin, it's like a serial number cut in, like certain one before firmware wouldn't work, and then now this new one out has to have that firmware. But I've done that and even replaced the CCD, and it still doesn't work.
What problem are you having?
Shading, lines, RGB lines, and then John was here. He went up to the prison up there and replaced one and put it in there. Didn't fix it. Tried to put the old one back in there. It wouldn't work either. Like throwing air fairs or something. And 9401 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So it ended up being the cable.
Was it the cable?
I believe so.
So that's what I was saying. The issues that I know mostly about the CCD are going to be this cable that comes out and runs down to the board.
Like the radio one or the
There's two,
yeah.
but the one with the metal,
Okay.
I think, is the one that carries the image data. And that's the one that I think goes bad. But if I'm in there, I do both.
Right.
Because if you're in there, why do one and not the other? Right. I guess another thing I've seen is the original left on glass.
Yeah.
You guys seen that a lot? Have you been able to resolve it?
Yeah, with ADF height sometimes was
Correct.
a problem.
Yep.
And I think actually it was all the problem.
So pretty much all of the time it's going to be the rear hinges.
Right.
They're not set properly, and that causes the issue. In the rare case that that's not the problem, you have this, I think it's PS201. Correct. This is width, this is length. So depending on what's not reading, if it's not reading correct width, you know you have an issue here, it's probably the cable.
Another thing too I haven't seen in a long time is the belts were backing up real bad
Mm-hmm.
and like breaking the gears off of them.
Correct. Yeah, that hasn't happened on these really much. It's mostly I've seen it on the smaller desktop.
I'm talking about transfer belt.
Oh, the belt?
Yeah, like
I'm talking about the
backed
drive.
up like hard tater and bust the gear off of them.
Yeah, so somebody brought that up to me yesterday, and
You haven't heard that?
Yeah, we had a bunch.
Oh man.
we have not had one. The only thing that we could come up with yesterday when they brought it up was it probably has something to do with the toner.
That's what I was thinking.
Would be because during the pandemic and then coming out of it, everybody got creative. You all know with the H toner, and I think manufacturing changed, things changed, and I believe it's a toner problem, not a machine problem.
Wow.
Correct. It should phase its way out, but
It was weird, yeah.
Yeah.
Never, I mean, even down into the chute that drops down into the hopper.
Correct.
The waste turner would, I mean,
Yep.
Hard as a rock.
Yep.
We've even seen that on print production of toner filter product for the 37, 47. Those are not even going full life. Or it gets plugged up with that e-toner.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that can happen too, even with, regular toner, because you have to watch your coverage data. If the customer's got big swings in coverage, that they run, heavy coverage, and your coverage is at 20% or more, and then it's dropping down to single digits. That is fluctuations, and especially if there's long runs, 15, 20K at 28%, and then they drop down to 5, 6%, and it's going to just start throwing toner out.
That's when we had that issue up there. They were running full coverage and they run envelopes with
Yeah.
a little bit of text. Remember up there at Central?
Yes, I must say.
Yeah, so there's dip switches for that, but you gotta be careful with those as well, because you don't wanna just, max out those dip switch settings right out of the gate. You wanna kind of work your way into it a little, just to even out the coverage flow.
Yep. So I think that has a lot to do with toner. You should see it phase out. Toner's getting back to normal. Working on it. Starting to. So those issues should start going away. Do you have any questions about anything that we went over? Or was I not clear on something? Did I talk too fast? Because I tend to ramble. So just if you have any questions at all. See, that concerns me.
Documentation's in the back.
Documentation's in the back. So we'll do one more time then. If you pass, then we're done. Okay? So what do we do first? When you get there. Huh? Identify the store. You can't answer these. Okay. What do you do after that?
We need documentation. We don't remember stuff.
I'm old.
Okay, so you're gonna identify the storage board, right? That'll determine what you're gonna do. Run the GXX tool. That will also determine what you're gonna do. Check power. That'll also determine what you're gonna do. All these are preliminary things that you need to check prior. Then run your tool. Follow that. You can always try to reload firmware if you know what the same version is that was on it, but typically when you get there you don't know because it's stuck. So that's an issue. You would have to know, again, by looking at the board, what one you have to reinstall whatever firmware that you're going to install so you don't break the machine. Running the reset tools and then the firmware and all that, sometimes it'll fix it, bring it back. There's just a lot of things you can do before you just start throwing boards at it. But I'll tell you right now, the first thing you're going to be checking is that storage board. After that, it's going to be your CPU. If it has the 112 layer storage board, don't replace it. Replace the CPU. Unless your GXX tool tells you to replace it. That's the most important part of it. And then the sub hopper stuff. You guys sounds like you're familiar with it. So if you get the light densities, go in the back. You're familiar with the error codes and how to resolve them. Oh, another one that I get a lot is the C2152. Does everybody know what that is?
It used to be alienation.
2152 on the I-Series is the first pressure release motor for the transfer belt. So you'll get that code a lot. Most of the time and in the manual it doesn't tell you this, right? But it's the fusing drive assembly. Because on the bottom right of the fusing drive assembly is a clutch and a gear. And that goes in, and that's what meshes with the ITB. That's what drives that. So a lot of the times I've seen where we've had bad fusing drive assemblies right out of the gate. I couldn't tell you why. We're still using clutches, so that's part of the problem because clutches don't last, Unfortunately, in order to resolve that, you have to do the drive assembly, which I don't know if you've done it before, but if it takes a few hours. Yep.
Mm-hmm. 8 series, I replaced a lot of it.
Yep. So you get that a lot. First thing to check with that is the sensor in the rear of the machine, because what happens is toner drops off from the belt, falls on the sensor, and it can't detect when it cams and uncams. So a lot of times if you pull it out, clean that sensor and put it in, you can leave. But there's other times where people will go and be like, oh, you need a transfer belt. Ordered a belt, put it in, same problem. So there's just simple preliminary things to check and do before you just start ordering and replacing stuff. Other than that, I think those are all the issues that I really know about on the I-Series. I covered the feeder, the hopper, the HV, the boot issues. So jamming is a whole different day for a whole different conversation.
It's like the guides all jacked up.
Yeah, so Roger dealt with that yesterday. I mean, I guess the two big problems is the 416 and the 417.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
And I know that KMI is working on the horizontal conveyance portion.
Yeah.
But as far as like the paper feed itself, I haven't heard much.
How about the voices?
You know, and that's, yeah. And I think that's part of.
How'd that go, Lee?
I'm not doing it again.
Come on, Lee.
I think that's part of stuff that they're working on. They're aware of it. And the 416 is the one that slides the paper over, I believe. Or no, it's the 417. Yeah.
460, yeah.
That one, you know, has its issues too. But
Especially loading paper.
correct.
But other than that, they seem to run great.
It either works or it doesn't.
You're right.
It's not like an intermediate issue. So I know that they are working on the 416. But yeah, it's unfortunate. Feed assemblies, you've seen them having to be replaced. If you're having issues, they've been told by Konica the blue rollers, replace them with the orange rollers. Yep. Just trying to think, finishers.
Finishers, the ejectors.
Ejector unit.
That's like the only issue with those things.
Yep, pretty much, or finisher control board.
Yeah.
One of the two, usually.
Yeah.
And that's fun to replace if you've never done it.
Oh, yeah. It's a blast.
Yep. It's a great time.
And not to replace it.
And what's great is there's no disassembly instructions, so
You just gotta figure it out.
it's take a screwdriver and send it.
It's usually you don't have the room to do it wherever you're at.
Yeah, exactly. And that's pretty much it. I mean, we've had some. What did?
Fix that. I think we have doors on.
Yeah.
Like the top? No, the top cover. Like this thing was like.
Oh yeah, and on the backside, you'd always have to push it down. Yeah.
Well, we were like flexing this pin
Were
in
you?
the back,
Yeah.
and it would actually.
Just to hold it tighter. Yeah.
That's all you could do.
Yep.
They would go, but.
We've had some CIS errors. For here, you'll get CIS errors. Yep. I haven't seen I've seen the CIS errors on here, but it's never been the actual unit. It's been the board.
We've also had issues with that, the handle that comes down.
Oh, up
The
here?
underside.
Yep.
The sensor in there.
Yep.
It doesn't, you have to like bend for that sensor to go up in it.
Which one are you
On
talking
the right
about?
side, on the top here.
This?
You gotta take the cover off.
Oh,
The sensor up in there that actually
yeah.
shows that that's closed.
So what they do a lot of times is the customer will just do this.
Yeah.
And, you know, it'll latch sometimes, but it won't.
The top.
Yeah, it won't fully latch, and then it causes issues. So you have to just latch it like that.
Yeah, and even when I've been there and closed it correctly.
Correct.
The bracket that the sensor's on,
Mm-hmm.
you have to flex it out.
Correct. So if you're aware of it,
Yeah.
I mean that's kind of what's going on.
Maybe it's a little obvious. I mean, I don't know what's going on.
They found something yesterday on the doors with the guide. Yeah, with that jam. I think they're gonna work on it. It's this guide.
It's low on one side?
Yeah, see the gap? Yeah, so that's something that we discovered yesterday when they went to look at that machine or something with
Yeah,
you,
we
right? Yeah.
I tried to actually move it.
Yep. So they looked at a couple other
On
ones.
my shelf, laid it on the
Yeah.
table, and took it all off, but it's still.
It is.
System going across.
I tried like loosening a screw on one side,
Well, when I first started
Yeah.
fighting the one up
just to see if
there,
I could get it to move.
Rick was setting the machine up here, and I called him, and I'm like, Jeff, send me a picture of this gap
Me and
here.
Chuck noticed that, yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, it's different. And it's brand new machine out of the box. He's setting it up, and it's
They're all the same.
Yeah.
I've noticed that on prior ones, on there, they're just like that.
Yep. So they're working on
Well, I
that.
never really looked at it until we had the problem up there where it's dog earing, and I'm
Correct.
like, something's off right here. But
Dog earring on 416, that Mylar. You guys seen that? So there's on the 416, when you pull it out, there's a Mylar guide
Oh, yeah.
right here. That'll
Sometimes.
causes dog earring. So, but that's not what was going on with you guys. No, you're well beyond that.
So just going out the LCT, I got it throughout the trees.
no, it does it all.
Yeah, it does it all the time.
Yeah, it started originally it was just the LCT.
Yep.
And now it's like, well, they're not using the LCT so much,
Yeah,
but you see it out of tray 3 and tray 4.
right.
But you don't see it from the bypass
Bypass or tray 1 or 2.
because that's after that
It's,
point.
so it's got to be something below.
Correct.
Yeah, well, we knew it was before the fuse report.
Correct.
Fully ready.
We knew it was before transfer.
Full transfer.
Correct.
But your image was always skewed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Awesome.
So yeah, I mean that's pretty much all I got. If you guys have any questions, if you remember something, shoot me an email. Like I said, I don't answer the phone all the time because like next week I'm in New York City and New Jersey. The week after that,
I'm sorry.
yeah, I know. I spent 14 months in New Jersey, and then I came down here and I got culture shock really hard.
That was me.
Because I was like, this is, people are opening the doors and they're like, oh, bless you, sir. Have a blessed day. I'm like, I just came from New Jersey and that guy wanted to beat the shit out of me because I didn't open the door for him.
Because you looked at him.
Yeah, because I looked at him. What you looking at me? I'm like, whoa, dude. Come down here and people are just like, oh, God bless you. Want a sweet tea? I'm like, what?
Your child will come in here and drive through at Taco Bell.
Yeah.
The person in front of you pay for your food. Like,
Yeah. I'm like, what? What is going on here?
where are these people from?
Yeah, I swear. So I love it. I would never go back up. Everything down here is so much more chill. Everybody up there is high demand and they think that you owe them and they're rude. I mean, New Jersey and New York City is one of the worst places that everybody thinks that you owe them and they're not nice at all. So coming down here is like, this is paradise for me.
That's great. Get you a Tudor's biscuit.
Yeah.
Or Susie's, you gotta eat at
Or Susie's.
Susie's, yeah.
You got to catch Susie's open.
Yeah.
I think they close 11:30. Yeah.
Wow.
They don't have lunch anymore.
I think you can get it.